So it's time for our TV roundup. Let's talk about Game of Thrones. Now, as for season 1, Dennis, Leah, you've just seen it, and I know that season 2 is about to premiere on April 1st. I haven't watched the show, but I know there's a lot of awards buzz and this going around with it, so I'm curious, should I be tuning in to see season 2?
Well, let me give you some background first.
All right.
Now, Game of Thrones is based on a series of fantasy books called A Song of Ice and Fire, the first book of which is called Game of Thrones. The stories are set in a mythological world that's very kind of medieval-like, where the seasons last a decade. And it's got some monsters and some magic in it. However, it's definitely an environment where the political intrigue between the Seven Kingdoms is very much foregrounded. Now, I've read all the books, and because I have a little trouble keeping separate my feelings for the books versus my feelings for the show.
Having not read the books, I feel like I am given latitude to enjoy these characters as they are being presented to me for the first time. We have all of these families that have varying degrees of power, and there's legacies, and there are vendettas, and people all jockeying, vying for power. You have numerous characters. There are a lot of characters in this series, which I think is okay. It just means you gotta pay attention. We are now at the point in Game of Thrones where we're starting to see the threads come together and collide and clash and mean the end of some characters and the rise of other characters.
Right. Even the Borgias aren't this complicated.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
They all have their own motives. And what's great is that they don't forget their grudges.
Right.
A character will disappear for a while and then come back and be like, remember that thing you did? Well, I'm still upset about that. And, if the knife goes in. HBO has spared no expense. You can see it on the screen. They have filmed on locations in Europe. They've got sets of castles. They commandeered some of the largest sound stages in Europe to build their standing sets. It's an immense production.
You've got these enclaves of populations of people, and they look authentic.
Yes, it does.
You believe it. I mean, it's rendered in such a believable way that you go along with it.
Seven kingdoms have been united under one banner. And some of those kingdoms are important. We have the Starks, and their symbol is a wolf, and they are the kingdom of the north. We have the Lannisters, and their symbol is the lion, and they are the richest kingdom, and you might say the politically most powerful. And then we have the Baratheons, and their symbol is the stag. And Robert Baratheon is the current High King, and he's the one who's united all the smaller kingdoms under one banner. And the idea, of course, is that Robert Baratheon will die, and then the Game of Thrones begins. So some of the main characters are, of course, we have Ned Stark, played by Sean Bean. But my favorite character is Tyrion Lannister, who is the youngest son of the Lannisters, who are essentially cast as a lot as the bad guys.
He is a dwarf, and he's played by Peter Dinklage, who won an Emmy, actually, for Game of Thrones. He is somebody that has had to kind of sit back and gain power through his intellect. Everybody else uses a sword or some kind of force or violence. Peter Dinklage plays him really, really well. He's probably one of
to a T.
So I'm a little confused. Is Tyrion a good guy?
No.
Yes. And then I think one of my other favorite characters, and she's just awful. She's just a horrible, horrible person. Hence why she's one of my favorites, is Cersei Lannister. And Cersei is one of these people who has had to kind of negotiate power through all of the men in her lives.
She's very bent.
she's somebody you do not ever turn your back on.
Exactly. In fact, the title comes from something she said. It's a quote of hers.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
Here we have the fantasy elements. We've got dragons. We've got White Walkers, which are this kind of perhaps demonic
frost creatures
from the north that the humans had to build a gigantic wall. I mean, this wall is huge.
So we've got, of course, April 1st, second season's coming out. What do we have to look forward to, season 2?
Well, first, let me say that their plan is to film one book per season. So in other words, they're going to adapt each novel into a series of television shows over a season. That worked great with the first book because it was so well structured. But now that we're into the other books, that's going to be really hard to do.
The showrunners, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, David Benioff being a screenwriter. So I trust, based on his previous work and what has happened thus far with Game of Thrones, that they'll figure out what to cut out. And we're going to trust that with the showrunners and a very skilled and experienced network like HBO, that they're going to operate in the best interest of all parties involved, primarily the audience. They left off the first season with a focus on Tyrion Lannister. And they definitely set up a lot of interest with Daenerys Targaryen. And we're going to see what's going to happen with her in the second season. So it should be very interesting.
So it definitely sounds like the show is very serialized. If I pick up starting at season 2, am I going to be just completely confused?
Well, I was confused at season 1. I just got to say that. And like I said, you have to pay attention and you have to listen. I think that you can pick it up in the second season. And I think that the second season will make you want to go back and watch the first.
I would agree. The relationships between the characters is what really drives the story. And if you get hooked into it, you're going to want to know everything you can about those relationships. So you'll go back and watch the first season.
So it sounds like season 1 was pretty great. You both liked it. I'm curious what your vote is for season 2. Take your tickets.
Although I had some complaints with the books, none of those faults are really in the TV show. So for fans of the genre or for newcomers, it's see it.
As someone who does not like a lot of fantasy, but does like a lot of sex and violence and intrigue and struggling for power, Game of Thrones takes you right there, and I'm looking forward to Sunday nights again, so I say see it.
All right, so it looks like your votes add up to 2 tickets, which is a see it for Game of Thrones.
Yay!
Cheers.
Cheers.
To Sunday, April 1st.
Winter's coming. So let's hear what you think about the upcoming season of Game of Thrones. Send us your comment on what you'd like to see, what you hope they show, what you hope they won't show, or how much trouble you think they're going to have adapting that second novel to a season of television.